Welcome to the Minimalist Educator Podcast, a podcast about paring down to refocus on the purpose and priorities in our roles, with co-hosts and co-authors of the Minimalist Teacher book, Tammy Borneman and Christine Arnold.
On this week's episode of the Minimalist Educator Podcast, we talk about the topic of the twin sins of planning. This is another part in our three-part bend about instructional strategies. So we hope you enjoy finding out about the twin sins of planning. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Minimalist Educator Podcast. I'm here with Tammy today. How are you, Tammy?
I'm pretty good. I'm excited that we're kind of in this 3-week run of these specific instructional pieces to teaching. So I'm looking forward to talking about today's topic. How are you?
Yeah, good. No, same. I think it's good because, we talk about so many different aspects of education. So it's nice to spend a little bit of time thinking about some instructional strategies and diving back into the book, The Minimalist Teacher, some of the things that we talked about in there as well. It's nice to revisit that work that we did previously.
For sure. So today we are talking about the twin sins of planning.
Isn't that great? I love that. Who thought of that as an idea? It's awesome.
Right. It feels like you're doing something totally wrong, which kind of, but also, I don't know, we just have to talk this through. Because planning is tricky for sure. Mm-hmm. This idea was introduced by McTighe and Willis just pre-COVID, it seems like. And we know that Jay McTighe is, known for UBD and backwards planning. And so to know that he has, spent a good portion of his educational career focusing on planning and really digging into effective practices and what works best for instruction, teaching, and learning. This is kind of an interesting idea, actually.
Absolutely.
And I think probably most of us have been stuck, caught, trapped in it. If that's the right word.
Yeah, if not both of them, definitely in one.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So again, last week we talked about a double whammy. Today we're talking about twin sins. So
something about the number 2 that we're working on.
Yeah. So what are the twin sins?
Okay, so the twin sins of planning. So there are 2 of these sins that people get caught up when they're planning. The first one is what they call activity-oriented planning. So we're basing our planning just on an activity that might be fun or, that kids would love that. That'd be so exciting, or wouldn't that be cute? So we're focused on the activity rather than the deep learning.
Guilty.
Yeah. Who hasn't been guilty? Absolutely. And then the second sin that they talk about is this preoccupation with coverage. So again, moving away from that deep learning that we want to achieve and getting really, really over-focused on covering everything that we can possibly cover, but doing it in a way that ends up just being this very surface level, just quick touch base, and never really getting to that deep understanding with that transfer and application of what the kids can do. So those are the twin sins, focusing too much on activity and also on coverage.
Yeah. Relatable for sure. I'm sure our listeners are like, I've done that for sure. And I mean, as you're learning to teach and plan, it's going to happen, right? You have to find your way somehow to become an effective planner, and you're not going to know how to do it right away. But this made me think of, I was looking at a unit plan this morning that a teacher sent me, and it was very much the first one, activity oriented, which is great. But then how are you going to teach that?
Yeah.
How are you going to teach that? And I think that one of the the things that I loved so much about when we used to teach together in Singapore, and when we would have our team meetings, I mean, I know that we were on different teams, but the process was the same, right? Like we were all looking at, this is our unit of study. How are we going to teach these ideas? So there was really like, yeah, we know, we got to the activity part after we were like, this is how we're going to teach it. Because you need all of those pieces, but you can't, it's not teaching if you just have an activity.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And similarly, if your focus is just on, I have to teach all of this content.
Yeah.
Is that really teaching if you're just like, I'm expelling information in your direction as fast as I possibly can? Is that actually what we want to be doing as well? The thing that is coming up for me when I look at these twin sins is that it's really teacher-centered, isn't it? It's the teacher really being at the center of the activity, whether it's, being focused on activities or coverage, rather than on the students themselves, which I think is quite interesting to think about.
Yeah, for sure. Because you can definitely co-plan some activities with your students, right? They can tell you what they want to do. But I think one of the things that teachers get excited, right?
Yes, we do. We really do.
Yeah, we do. And then we're like, we get carried away. And so we get planning something like, oh, this would be so fun. But then we disregard, we just forget about how much time and energy we're putting into planning activity that may not serve its purpose the way we want it to. And so that time figuring out these really elaborate activities can be just a waste, sadly, because they are the fun things. Like we want to plan those things.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's often not the best use of time unless it's like a long-term thing, then that might be different, like a long-term project or, some kind of interactive thing, that's different. But I've seen a lot of times where teachers will, put a lot of time and energy even searching for something that's the right thing. When really, if you just sat back and thought, let's go back to our episode of one teaching point, what am I teaching and how can I teach it? Like 2 simple questions. You would probably figure it out really quick in a quick and easy activity that wouldn't make you go crazy.
For sure. And that's so much of the work that we talk about with teachers is how do we get to the priority of what we're doing, which is, in this case of instructional strategies, it's student understanding. How can we get there with bang for your buck rather than getting over focused on the fun activity or what would be really cool at the end, for sure. And thinking about that is this idea of return on investment. It's often a business term, but I think it's really applicable here. If you think about the return on investment, if you're thinking about how much time am I putting into planning this or preparing this activity versus how much is it going to impact student learning, I think that's going to help you make a good decision about whether it's really worthwhile or not.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm kind of thinking here too, like, I don't want to sound like a stickler, right? Like, don't plan any fun activities because it's going to take you too long. But we just have to be careful, right? Because teachers love these things. Many teachers do. And they want to be creative. And so, like, we don't want to necessarily stifle a teacher's creativity and say, like, don't plan that because that's not going to be worth it. But you kind of have to be real and ask yourself, is it going to be worth it? Like you've been saying, what's the impact on student learning? Is this going to give me the return on investment? And if it's not, even if you're like, no, the answer is no, don't do it. Right? Like if you have to think about the answer, then the answer is no. And so just reevaluate or rethink how you could maybe break down that activity or prolong it, or like think about the skills, something so that you don't have to stifle your creativity if that's something you want to do, but just like use it better.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely use it better. Or I was going to say, maybe sprinkle it out a little bit across the year and just, have a few points where you're like, I'm just going for fun right now. I'm just going for the pure enjoyment of this experience. I think there's space for that too. And I think, when we're talking about the second sin of the preoccupation with coverage, I think that's super understandable as well. You can definitely see why people get sucked into that, because we're told we have this curriculum, you have these standards or objectives that you need to cover. And it feels, especially if you've got, evaluation cycles or standardized testing, all of these different factors coming in, it feels like that is just hugely important to say, yes, I have proof I taught this.
Yeah.
But if we're doing that at the expense of them actually retaining what they're learning and being able to apply it, then we've kind of lost the point of everything that we're trying to do. But again, it's super understandable why people fall into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes me think of when I would spend some of my summer times curriculum planning with some teachers in New York. And I found it always easier to be better about the planning with ELA, because we're like, well, this is how we're going to teach this reading and this is how we'll teach this writing. But then when it came to the content, math was actually fine because, we had a teacher guide and, all of that support. But for science and social studies, we had textbooks, which are fine to have some content. But then I found once, and this could have been like a tired thing or like, I don't know, but the further we got into that planning, I relied more on like, oh, we're going to read this page and do these questions. Again, but how am I teaching it?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not teaching anything then. We're just reading it together, maybe talking about something, and then they're answering these questions or doing this little experiment or something. But that just like really sticks in my mind as one of those could have been a tired thing. I'm tired of planning.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know my students yet because, I'm just using the textbook as my guide.
Right.
And, and not saying you can't do these kinds of things during your summer months or ahead of time, but I think you have to leave out, like you can map your unit topics definitely in your content, but you've got to wait to plan in some of the hows.
Mm-hmm.
Like you might build in some, like, let's say the start of the unit, we're always going to do a chalk talk so I can get to know what people know, or use a zoom in or something like that. Some kind of like simple protocol that gets them engaged and hooked in. And then like, I am going to have to wait to get to know my kids, to know what kind of activities I'm going to have to plan for them or how I'm going to teach them. And, like that isn't going to be for everything all the time, but, I got to leave some room for knowing them.
Absolutely, for sure. But it brings me back to what I was saying earlier about the teacher-centeredness of these two practices, because if you are super focused on, I'm going to do this activity, this will be really fun, this will be really cute, or I've got this end product in mind, or if you're just, I'm getting through the whole breadth of this curriculum, you're ignoring where the kids are themselves, what they're interested in, what they know, what their prior knowledge is. And so if you go headlong into these twin sins, you're ignoring the kids that are in front of you with this other goal in mind, which is, really, it's not really where we want to go when we're in the business of education, is it?
Right. And so, a lot of, if you have programs that you're using, which can be helpful, they give you a pacing guide, right? But again, they don't know who your kids are. So yes, we're looking at that coverage piece. And, a lot of programs give some differentiation for how to challenge learners or how to remediate and whatever, which are all helpful. But again, like they don't know your kids either.
Right.
And so they might offer some okay ideas to start with or think about. But it's when we get so caught in the content, we just forget about, like last week we talked about that double whammy where we're looking at pairing the content with skills. Like, where's the skill development in here?
Yeah.
Right? Like it might be there in your teacher guide, but is that one of those things that gets dropped off because there's so much in a teacher guide? Like it's the teacher materials that we get for programs is overwhelming.
And
So,
what do you do then if, say, you're supposed to be doing a unit on, I don't know, fractions, for example.
Okay.
I went a different direction.
Yeah. Yes.
Let's say fractions, for example, and you've got this pacing guide, you've got a teacher guide, and it's telling you like, here are your lessons, here are the objectives that you're going for, but you realize that your students have a gap in this area.
Yeah.
What do you do then? Do you ignore the gap and just carry on because you've got a pacing guide, or do you then add in more things to cover because you've got to now go back and teach the foundational skills before what you need to do, as well as what you need to do? That's like it feels like you're going to get trapped in a corner there when you've already got so much to cover. That's really tricky.
Yeah, it is. And I've had that question a few times lately from teachers. They're like,
oh, really?
We're teaching this unit. Yeah, we're teaching this unit, but we're noticing these gaps, but we feel like we have to keep going. And like, don't keep going because you're just going to get further behind and have to reteach even more.
Right.
So yeah, and it's so tricky. And it's generally been with like the K1 and 2 classes, not so much with the upper elementary, which is good because those are they still the COVID kids, like the main ones? Maybe the fifth graders are.
Yeah, they're the ones that miss that real beginning early education stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And so but we still see lots of ramification in the younger kids with social skills and things, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I've heard that quite a bit where teachers are like, my kids aren't getting this foundational piece, but I feel like I have to keep going. And I'm like, you are not alone. Like, do you know how many teachers are saying this and feel like they just have to keep going because of this pacing guide, which is a great tool to have, but it does not dictate how you should be teaching your students and when to teach the content. Because if they're not ready for something, why are you moving on?
Yeah.
Right. And then again, like if most of your kids are getting it and just your handful, then just do a small group, right? Like you can teach on and just figure out, restructure your lessons or whatever, so that you're doing some station teaching or, some other kind of variation of an effective instructional model. But yeah, the pacing guides that are offered by programs, they often don't have buffer time in there either.
Right.
Which we've talked about. I think we talked about buffers in season 1 or 2. And just that importance of feeling like you have that wiggle room to be able to like catch up almost, or fill in the gaps and get some foundational skills in there. But it's sometimes that document causes a lot of stress.
Yeah, I can imagine. But maybe we can rest assured here with McTighe and Willis that, they're calling it the twin sins of planning, that, we can feel reassured that we're doing the right thing if we stop and we pause and we make sure that we're not just overly focused on coverage over everything else.
Yeah, for sure. Again, we talk a lot about intentionality with things. And again, this is being very intentional in how you're doing your planning.
Absolutely. Yeah. So do we have pare down pointers for the twin sins?
Oh, boy. Why is this always so tough?
I don't know, but we do it to our guests every episode.
I know, but I feel like we give them a heads up, kind of. But people are usually good with picking up something. Okay, let's see. I kind of almost feel like it's similar to my pare down pointer for last week, which is like, look at your planning documents and evaluate them or audit them almost, and have a look at what's in your plans. Is it all activity based? Are you just looking at coverage? Do you have both of those things? Do you have your how-tos? What's in there? And is there a way to better, I don't want to say plan, but better document almost how you're putting in your content with how you're teaching? Is there like a shift in how you can use your planning template or your planning book to make sure that you aren't just putting the content and the activity?
Right. Absolutely. I'm gonna be a little bit cheeky here with my pare down pointer.
Okay. Go for it.
So I think my pointer for this episode is to be kind to yourself if and when you do fall into these traps, because we've all been there. And we've talked about why it's so easy for us to be there, like getting excited to be creative and do something really fun, or for external reasons, getting super concerned about whether you're covering all of your curriculum or not. But I think when you realize that you're falling into this, be kind to yourself. We're all human. Yeah. We all get caught up sometimes. It's not the end of the world. We can always restart and try again. But yeah, just we're often so critical of ourselves in the work that we do because we want to do such a good job, but just take it a little bit easy with yourself.
I do really like that human-centered pare down pointer.
Okay, good.
To my do an audit of yourself. Which both important things, but maybe you have to be kind to yourself first and just understand that we can't do all the things the right way all the time. Yeah. We're in a constant state of revision. That's what teaching is.
Absolutely. Definitely. That's a good analogy for it, for sure.
Yeah, it's a lot. Well, this was a fun one to talk about, for sure.
Absolutely. Definitely. From many different angles too.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing your thoughts today, Christine.
Thank you. And we'll see you all next time. Today's episode was brought to you by Plan Z Professional Learning Services, forward-thinking educator support. Find out more at planzplservices.com.
Be sure to join Tammy and Christine and guests for more episodes of the Minimalist Educator Podcast. They would love to hear about your journey with minimalism. Connect with them at PlanZPLS on Twitter or Instagram. The music for the podcast has been written and performed by Gaia Moretti.